This is the Marzen Retrospective. You can check out the full Grain to Glass episode on the link above. Today though, we are going to re-evaluate the Marzen. We'll look at the vital statistics, check out the schedule and fermentation profile, the costs, the price, and finally the lessons learned. Hello and welcome, I'm Rob King and this is our re-evaluation of the Marzen. Starting with that colour and the carbonation. It's come out really well, perfectly in line for the style. I've tried a few other Marzens over the Oktoberfest period and this definitely compares. Look at that colour, look at that clarity. It is of course a malt forward dark lager. And you definitely get those malty tastes right from the offset. Nothing particular from a hop perspective on this one. It is all that malt forward aroma. Definitely bready, toasty. I was extremely pleased with this brew when I tried it the first time. Here we are a month later and this is my last two bottles. So I'm going to enjoy. Lots of the credit goes to Cross My Loof for putting together such a wonderful kit. Vital statistics then. Well, this came in just slightly over target. So we were looking for 5.3% ABV. We came in at 5.5, and that was really down to the fact that we missed both OG and FG, both slightly below target, but actually enough below target for a slightly stronger beer at the end. The impact though was very small on the final taste. This of course was a great starter brew. Most of the equipment you can use with this brew you have in the kitchen. There's relatively few items you need to buy on top. So if this is your first brew, this is a great place to look. It was of course 4.5 litres into the fermenter, which actually gave us 3.5 litres in the final bottle. Carbonation was slightly on the higher side at 9 grams per litre. You could have carbonated a little less if that is your preference. Moving on to the schedule. Now this was quite an elongated fermentation profile because of the presence of lagering. So at the very start we spent 21 days in fermentation, 2 of those days including dry hops. At the end of fermentation we moved it up to 15 degrees centigrade, but we didn't do that in a single jump, rather we did it in 1 degree per day to bring it up to 15 degrees before we bottle carbonated and put it away for a further 26 days to bottle carbonate. Finally we move into lagering, where we drop the temperature down to 7 degrees centigrade, i.e. I put it in the fridge, and there we lagered for 16 days. Most of the costs then came from the kit itself at £10.55, but there are a few additions that we also added on top. The bottled water, now that's an option, you could have used tap water, came in at £1.74, and then I actually dry hopped with some of my own hops, but that was a mere 22 pence of some hops I already had in the fridge. Final additions then were Fermado for nutrient, that was 80 pence, and some priming sugar for carbonation, that was a final 11 pence. Bring it all in to a grand total of £13.43. You divide that by the 7 500ml bottles that we got and we end up with a price per pint of £2.18. This is a relatively small kit, so the price per pint actually comes out a little higher than some of the bigger batches, but that is the downside of a smaller batch. The bigger the batches, there is a bit more of economy of scale. The 500ml that we know and love and I'm drinking today would come in at £1.92. Here we are then for lessons learned, starting with lesson number 1, back to basics. And I started out as a kitchen brewer, I had loads of fun, so it was great to come back and re-experience it for a 4.5 litre fermentation. This is a great example of where you can start with home brewing, with relatively few additional pieces of equipment actually needed. Lesson number 2 was the boil over problem. Actually, one of the great things of a smaller batch is it all happens much more quickly. Heating up the liquids, heating up to boil, all of that happened much faster. I think I'd become a bit slow using other pieces of equipment, so it did surprise me and catch me out when it all boiled over. It is really fast when you heat things up on a gas stove. Lesson number 3 was the 90-minute boil. It did seem a bit of a long boil, and in practice that vigorous boil plus the boil off rate did mean we had too high a final gravity and we had too little liquid. Now we were able to compensate for that and make some adjustments. In hindsight, I would have kept it to a 60-minute boil and at least would have ended up closer, if not quite exactly on, the target gravity that we were looking for. Lesson number 4 then is also related to the 90-minute boil, but specifically Pilsner malts and DMS. Now Pilsner malts are a little more prone to DMS, which is a cabbage-like taste in the final beer. The boil off reduces the amount of DMS and hence the longer boil time is recommended for Pilsner for this reason. However, it does appear this is an historic issue and modern malts do not suffer from the same problem. Lesson number 5, using a bigger bucket, is actually a lesson learned from previous brews, where that extra headspace makes sure you don't blow out any airlocks or have any mess. You've got plenty of room for expansion through Krausen. It also has a second benefit, which is when adding dry hops. A bucket makes it just so much easier to add and then later remove the dry hops during that stage. Lesson number 6, I think I called this out during the recipe itself. I made life so complicated for myself by doing the recalculation of volume, where actually the recipe had already specified what the expected volume was, and I could have simply topped up to the required 4.5 litres and Bob's your uncle. However, it was an interesting mathematical exercise to work out exactly what calculation you need to put in to be able to reach the final gravity that you're looking for. Lesson number 7, related to the previous lesson, is the calculation I used didn't quite work out correctly and in actual fact brought down the gravity too low to what I was targeting. So I was looking to 1.058 and I brought the gravity down to 1.054. Hence, I'm thinking if I use this calculation again, there is a margin of error, and in actual fact, I will reduce the total volume down by something like 5 to 10% of that calculated. The final lesson learned, and again, this comes from previous experience, is that sequence of ferment, bottle, carbonate and then lager in bottles. Now you may think, so what's so different about that? But you can do that lagering before bottling, and I have done it that way round before. There are certain problems with that though, and people have noted that waking up the yeast again to bottle carbonate later in the process can bring in some off flavours. Now when I've done it this way, I was very lucky. I didn't really experience any of those problems, but now I'm aware of it, I much prefer doing it in the sequence I did this time. Well, that's it for the Oktoberfest Marzen. Thank you very much for tuning in and listening. Please do like, subscribe and comment. It'd be great to hear from you. In the meantime, happy homebrewing, good health. When we started out on the Marzen, we had 5 homebrews left in the Homebrew Masterplan. Having now completed the Marzen, we now have 5 homebrews left in the Homebrew Masterplan. However, that would be called scope creep in project terms, but in homebrewing terms, that's a really nice problem to have.